Kasian's a big architecture and interior design firm, probably the largest in Canada, and approximately 300 employees. I guess that fluctuates with the Toronto Stock Exchange Index, but about 300 employees is what we have. And then we've got offices in Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto itself, and Vancouver, and a couple of satellites in Doha and Shanghai. I'm the BIM director at Kasian, but leaning these days more towards academia. So BIM at FM, the first thing I told Nick when he told me about this is that it makes total, absolute 100% sense that BIM and FM should have a correlation. And I'll just talk through some of the obvious reasons, at least the obvious reasons to me. We start by saying that facilities management represents, it's a bit of a sliding scale, I understand that, but we usually say that it will represent about 90% of the life cycle cost of the building, where design and construction will account for 10% of the life cycle of the building. And what that means, therefore, is that if you're the guy, if you're a hedge fund manager on Wall Street, you're the CFO of an organization that's looking to make real estate investments, and you're planning in the long term, well, 90% is what you want to think of first, right? So that has to be a critical part of your thinking, along with the procurement of the building, the design and the construction of the building. So you probably want to hear that the information systems that are going to underpin this development are taking into account what's going to be 90% of its costs eventually, right? In fact, I suppose that most people think that that's what happens. You'd be very surprised to hear that at the end of a construction project, a roll of paper is carried under somebody's armpit and dumped on the facility manager's desk, and he's told good luck, and that's how that. They'd be really surprised to hear that that's how this works, right? Because it just sounds like it makes sense that FM would be integrated into the whole process. Point of view of which is what I'm saying here. So putting on my software hat, my sort of software engineering hat here, I would say it's just a logical consequence of systems integration, right? If you're going to build a system, an information system, to do anything, you obviously want to integrate the piece that carries 90% of the costs into that system. But at the moment, we're not there yet. And what are the reasons? I think that, and again, I'm just giving you the reasons that came to my mind, and I'll imagine that for the most part they're valid, at least I hope they're valid. But architecture is regulated. It's a regulated profession. Architecture is not commerce. It's not, the law of contract is not what drives architects, it's the Architects Act. Right? And so therefore there are constraints. The architect does not walk in and say, all right, let's figure out a way to make the most money out of this. No, the architect has to come in and say, public safety, right? Or, sort of standards of care. There are constraints to the architect, and I suppose to the consulting engineers also have this, because they are also, registered professionals. So there are constraints, there's regulation, and that always means that we can't move as quickly or as aggressively towards what seems to make sense as we would like. And then the contractual relationships in architecture are adversarial, right? So then everybody walks in screening their gonads. You can't get to, just mutual benefit and best for project kind of conversations, because everybody's watching themselves, right? And so that it's tough to tell an architect or to tell the design team that let's all work together and sit together and make this, because they're looking at their contractual relationships and it's all about indemnities and I'm going to do this, but you can't sue me for that. And so that already creates an atmosphere where that's tough to achieve. And then the construction industry is notoriously fragmented, right? It's got, it's not like we're usually compared to manufacturing. So we're told that, manufacturing have achieved single-digit inefficiencies. So, Boeing or Airbus put together a 747, and they're less than 10% inefficient. So why can we do it in construction, where dollar for dollar, we're looking at about the same amount of money goes into these things, and the same amount of design effort and so forth. But the construction industry doesn't have a CEO. There's not one guy saying, you're all going to do this. So, it's fragmented, and then it's tough to bring everybody together and make them do what again seems obviously and absolutely logical, right? Integration of systems, sharing of information, and all the rest of it. So specifically looking at BIM and FM, some of the issues that it would just be good to understand if one was thinking of going in the direction of trying to do BIM and FM and get the value out of it, is that first of all, BIM is not, the building information model is not a single model, it's a federation of models, right? For models coming at you from very many different places, and there are issues therein. So if you go back to the language of the standard forms of contract, you get issues of copyright and use of documents, and those issues are gray areas at this moment. The architect can stand his ground and say, I own the intellectual property that is inherent in my contribution to the BIM. And his engineers can tell him the same. And they're backed by language that is not ambiguous. You don't need to be a lawyer to see what the language is saying. So then comes the issue of, okay, when it gets turned over, what happens to that intellectual property in the case of BIM? The case of a drawing, well, we'll give you the drawing and you can use the drawing to run your facility. But in the case of BIM, where there's information, some of that information was created, there's just much more information, there's just much more at stake, right? And so there are questions there whether an architect wants the facility manager to take his model, hand it over to the architect's competitor, where there is a lot of, shall I say, proprietary content in that model, so now the competitor has all that information. And questions of that nature would then make this to be an important consideration in terms of the whole flow of information. How freely can that information really flow? And these things have to be aligned with reality before, in order for us to make much more progress. And then the other thing is, again, a bit of a myth, another myth where, just give us your model and we'll use it to run our facility. It doesn't really work like that. I think Nick has pointed out that facilities management needs information of a certain, sort of the database requirements. So if it's a database you're going to put this information into, has requirements of integrity, right? You need the right formats, the right constraints applied. And many times when they're building these models, they don't think about that stuff. So you may find that taking up just run-of-the-mill building information model and trying to run a facility with it ends up being more effort than just recreating the thing, right? So that it's fit for purpose, right? So there's something we're doing these days called BIM execution planning that could help with this, because then you capture the intent of what you're doing the BIM for early in the process, but then you have to be there for that to work, right? You have to be at the table and say, okay, wait, I want you guys to set up the BIM so that I can extract the data and use it like so. You kind of have to be in the conversation, and that's, I guess somebody mentioned here earlier, that's a bit of the gap that the FM guys are not at the table when this is going on. So then, from the point of view of the design people, the design consortium, the design team, when you say FM, you've got to be clear. What exactly do you mean, right? Because there's different aspects to it, and if you're, for example, doing space management, where you want to be talking to the architect to get his model. If you get the structural engineer's model and you want to do space management, you're not going to get very far. I'll tell you that. So then you have to understand, okay, what aspects am I interested in? So with space management, yes, you probably want to talk to the architect, but you also have to tell him, you have to give him upfront information in terms of requirement, right? As I say, the format, what fields, and format it in what way, and make sure that that's happening consistently. So you probably want to have some way of checking as the project is developed. If you're looking at equipment, if your idea of what you want is to manage equipment, then you're probably looking at mechanical and electrical models, and in fact, typically more, the contractor would have much more to say about this stuff, right? The warranty, priorities and all the rest of it. So then, that's whose model you need to be going forward. That's who you need to be feeding the information that you want to be able to extract when you get into this management. Somebody, COBE is an acronym. Can't for the life of me remember what the letters stand for. But it's an acronym.
It's Building Information Exchange.
There you go. The idea of COBE is somebody's trying to create a format. Because again, it's all information systems, putting on my software hat, it's all about formats and consistency of those formats. If you have a lot of data and it's not properly formatted and it's not consistent, it's not going to be very much use to you. Because the amount of error checking, you're going to have to write more error checking code than the actual code that runs the software. So you may have, I've seen programs where we have 1 page of code and 50 pages are just checking for errors. If this is not right, well, then this is what you have to do. If this doesn't come in proper, well, then this is what you have to do. So if you don't have a uniform format, especially when you're dealing with big data, large amounts of data, you're not going to get very far. It's not going to be that efficient. Yes, you can do it, but it will be at such a cost and effort. Question was it worth it? So the COBE is trying to address that in the sense of, okay, what information can we start to grab out of the design and construction phases of the project that can then be fed into the facilities management phase. But the problem with COBE is that, and again, I'm glad we brought it up, that it's a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet with a bunch of tabs at the bottom. That's just too antiquated, right? That is the major problem. Just from a data structures point of view, it's using a really ancient data structure. Somebody needed to make this into a database, and I'm sure they will eventually, but sure, at the moment it's what we've got, and so that's what you can use to leverage. You can ask your design and construction team to hook into COBE and feed into it, then at least you have a leg up in terms of getting some consistent data that can then be used in the facility space. It may be that your idea of what you want for facilities management is some what I call kind of exotic usages that are starting, digital information, digital data is starting to be leveraged for, and that's all fine and good. But you got to know some of these things take specialized tools and they take specialty consultants to be able to do them effectively. The architect just won't wake up and be able to do it. In fact, even when the building is being designed, it's probably getting to be a little late because they've already defined the formats, defined the outputs, they're already generating information, and if a lot of it is already inconsistent, well, you've kind of already missed the boat. So you want to get in as early as you can. Yes, some data capture can be performed by consultants and contractors, there's no doubt, but again, they have to be told up front what you're looking for, and you need a plan to integrate all these things. It won't just happen. As I said, we're not McDonnell Douglas, one CEO and a huge enterprise resource package that just does everything. This is about moving data, so there has to be bridges, and you need a plan that allows those bridges to work and move data back and forth between different applications. And then be ready for the conversations. The IP conversations, additional services conversations, because get to a point where some folks will tell you that this is more than we would usually do, so it's additional services. And then the industry is still run by those adversarial relationships, those mistrust and suspicion still exists. People are going to want to be, cover themselves. Even as they give you information, they still want to make sure that it doesn't come back to bite.